All right, hi everybody. Welcome to part three of the ping pong series. Hope you're enjoying this. So today's going to be some amazing stuff. At least amazing for me. I've been just over the moon about this particular set of material. This is going to be all about PD controllers and hand track, one-to-one hand tracking. It's badass. Um, it's maybe it's not something that you've had to deal with. Maybe your hand tracking is like spot on or whatever. But I've been plagued with like laggy hand movement since day one of this project. It's never been fast enough for me. Early on in a project, you just start throwing some cubes out here, and you got like springs connecting things to try to drive an active ragdoll, and it's like horrible, and you're like, oh man, this is so like springy and bouncy and terrible. And then you like discover like configurable joint target velocity or PD controllers or whatever, and then you're like, oh man, this is way better. But it's still not good. It's still laggy because the whole PD controller thing is an iterative process. It's not perfect. It doesn't get there in a single frame, which is what we would want, right? You move the controller, boom, the rigid body is spot on, one to one, just one frame behind. That would be ideal, right? So here, I've got some visual aids here. Let me jump into these. These might seem silly, but I think they'll help. Okay, so I got a little controller here. This represents the target, and I've got a little hand. This represents the object that we're trying to move to the target. So here, when they're together, nothing needs to happen. But as soon as they're apart, we need to start adding forces to this rigid body to try to get it to the target. And that's what the PD controllers do, right? So some of you are familiar with PD controllers, other people are not. So this is, I'll gear this part towards talking about how PD controllers work. A lot of people are intimidated by them. They're really not that complicated. You can study them for like forever and still be learning stuff. But initially, it's just not that difficult of a concept, right? So the target and the object have a gap between them, and you want to apply a force to try to get the object to the target. And the strength of the force is proportional, that's where the P in PD controller comes from, is proportional to the size of the gap, right? So big gap needs big force, small gap needs small force. That's the P part, right? So the problem with that, just a P only controller, is that as this moves and this plays catch up, it's only accelerating, right? There's this constant gap between the two, and it's just getting faster and faster, and it finally gets to the target, but now it's got all this velocity, and it's gonna overshoot that. And then it's going to turn around and it's going to come back the other way and it's going to overshoot it again and again and again and again and again. It's going to oscillate, right? So P controllers are fast, but they oscillate, right? So that's where the D comes in, the derivative part. What you're going to do is factor in the velocities that are involved. And as this approaches, right, this has got no velocity. This has got a whole lot of velocity. As it approaches, you're going to apply a force in opposite direction to slow it down so that when they meet each other, the P part, the P force, is going to be nothing because they're on top of each. They're in the same place. So it doesn't need to apply a force from the P part component, but it does need to apply a force from the velocity part. Otherwise, it's really going to overshoot this, right? And so as this starts to approach, you try to make it so that it damps and lines up nice. And maybe it overshoots a little bit and comes back, or maybe it ends a little bit early and kind of creeps up. But at the end of the day, it's way better than a P-only controller that's sitting here doing this. All right, so that's a PD controller in a nutshell. So the problem that we've got, here, let me turn this back on. So again, the problem that we're trying to fix is that's a whole iterative process that takes time to resolve. It's got to come up with a guess and then a better guess and a better guess and a better guess and finally arrive at the goal, right? So what we want is something that can do it like in one frame. And we've got all the information that we need to know what force we need to do it in one frame, right? In other words, if we knew, so physics, basic physics, force equals mass times acceleration, right? If we knew the mass, which we do, and if we knew the acceleration needed, which we do, because we've got to get from here to here, from here to here in one frame, so we know what velocity we need, we know how long we have to do it, we know how fast we're going to have to, we know how fast we're going to have to get from so let's say this is like from 0 to 10. We know we need to get to position 10, and we know we want to do it in one frame. So we need a velocity of 10. And to get from a velocity of 0 to a velocity of 10 in one frame, we need an acceleration of 10 per unit, right? So force equals mass times acceleration is gonna answer everything that we need. We've got the mass, we've got the acceleration needed. All we need to do is calculate the force and apply it. And in the very next frame, the hand's going to be spot on, unless it bumps into something in the way. So that's really, really cool. Now the problem is the PD controller is also running. So this would be separate, or somehow if you could combine it with the PD controller, that seems like that would be ideal. That's what we're going to do, right? So we start here. So the way that this stuff is processed, the input goes first, then the scripts run, then the physics is processed. Right? So the input first, then the scripts, then the physics is processed. So for the PD controller, input goes first, then the scripts run, the PD controller calculates that there needs to be a force, so maybe it plans a force that's going to get it moving in the right direction, and then in the physics processing portion, it plays that out. This doesn't move, this goes again. This doesn't move, this goes again. But now it's faster, but now it's slowing down because of the D component. And it slows down and bang, it's here. But lots of frames have gone by. Again, what we want is to go from here all the way to here in a single frame. And have the PD controller not break in the process, because if the PD controller is also trying to correct this gap at the same time that the acceleration correction, the force equals mass times acceleration force correction that we're going to be applying is trying to correct this, then they're stepping on each other. And it's going to overshoot, or it's going to do some weird stuff. It's not going to be spot on. So what we want to do is ignore that part of it. We want to ignore the part of the to ignore it here. All we got to do is delay the controller location for the PD by a single frame. We just create a delay. And instead of processing where the controller is right now, we process the PD with the information of where the controller was last frame. Right? So in other words, again, let's play this out. So the input gets processed. Now the scripts run. We want to run the, I'll call it the acceleration correction. We want to run the acceleration correction next. The target acceleration correction next. So that's going to see this. It's going to calculate that it needs this much acceleration and this much force based on, and it's going to want to apply a force that's going to get the hand all the way to here in a single frame. All right, so it does the add force, but that doesn't get processed yet because we still have to process the PD, but it's queued up. It's going to go when the physics is processed. All right, so next, so the PD runs, but the PD, we've modified it. So instead of processing this gap here, the PD uses the input from a frame ago, which is when the controller was still here. So there isn't anything for it to do. There's no gap. So the force that the PD exerts is 0, right? So the only force that ends up being applied during the next physics run is the force that gets the hand all the way to the target in a single frame. Beautiful. Right. So now we've got the next frame to run. The problem is the hand is now hauling ass because it got all the way from here to here in a single frame, and it's going to shoot out the other side unless we have a deceleration event. Well, we did have a deceleration event with the controller because it went from here to here, but then it stopped. So the velocity of the controller is at 10, but we want it to go to 0, right? Because it didn't move again. So there's a negative acceleration event that happens, and we need to apply, and so then we plan to apply a force to the hand to do that deceleration event, right? So in the acceleration correction portion of the scripting, that gets applied. A big add force in the opposite direction to make that velocity go down to 0 so that the hand stays right there in that spot. Then the PD section of the script runs, and the PD says, well, the hand is here, and in the previous frame, it wasn't there, it was already here. In other words, the PD has nothing to do. So the movement is super clean. The PD does not interfere with the acceleration correction at all. It's perfect. It's so perfect. it's gorgeous. So here I've got some stuff set up where we can test this out. So these are in addition to doing the positional stuff, I got the torque stuff worked out as well. So these are here. Let me switch to first person. So these are the same concept but applied to torque, right? So these are controls for that. This is an object which is just floating there. It's a configurable joint attached to the world in that point. So it's not going to fly away or anything, but it can free spin in any direction. There is no dampening on it. There's no springiness on it. There's no angular PD controller on it. There's nothing. The only thing that's on it is the acceleration correction stuff that I'm doing, but for torque, right? So if I want to move this on an axis, then the acceleration was applied the instant this changed in acceleration. There's no more force applied to it because nothing is happening to this. This is spinning and that's spinning at the exact same angular velocity because in the single frame after I changed this, they matched. If I stop it, then it stops. If I move it, then it moves. And there is no overshoot. It is perfectly one frame behind. Exactly. And it's gorgeous. And I can try to confuse it by mixing this up and having a lot of acceleration events. It doesn't matter. The math is spot on. So it freezes in place. Again, there is nothing to stop this thing from spinning like crazy and just continuing to go and go and go and go and go. Right? So if the calculations were off, even by a tiny bit, then you would see it. It would manifest. But it doesn't, which is awesome. Okay. So I got 3 of these set up. So you can do it on different axes. Not that that really matters all that much, but I thought it was interesting that these are all like additive. So I can get all these going. And then if I like stop this one and then like stop this one, then the only one that's left is this one. And I slow this down and you can see it. Oh, this one's still moving. That one's still moving. Here, let me try that again. Like I said, I can stop 2 of these. And then the only one that's going is this one. And I can stop this one. And it's perfect. Ah, so beautiful. Okay, so these are set up similarly, but this can move in all directions. Now, these, however, so this one will spin forever if I get it going. There is nothing on this. These, however, have PD controllers associated with them. So if I move them, they're going to come back to position. And that's the PD controller that's doing that. And it's loose and floppy just because I want to exaggerate. So this is, when you're really stressing out, when you've got some really aggressive movement, this represents how sloppy it gets when that's happening. So this one on the left is only the PD controller. It doesn't have the acceleration correction stuff. This one has both the acceleration correction stuff and the PD controller, right? Angular PD controller. So here we go. So you get them going, and it looks pretty good. So we stop, and you can see the PD controller lags a bit behind, and it also takes a minute to get the rotation going in the right direction. That's just the PD controller catching up, because that's the only thing that's driving it. And this is how I normally move the hands, right? Is with a PD controller, and it's doing that, but in much less noticeable ways. But it's still doing that. What we want is this, where you can spin this in all sorts of different directions, and when you stop it, bang, it stops on a dime. That's what you want. Now, because this has the acceleration correction and the PD controller on it together, I can go over here and monkey with this, and you can see the PD controller is really fighting to get this thing in the right position. The acceleration correction isn't happening at all because there is no acceleration. That's just angular velocity, right? So this is all PD controller trying to get this thing back on track, which it does right away. So in other words, I can perturb this and it resolves because that's the job of the PD controller part of it. So you've got two different parts. You've got the acceleration correction, which handles the acceleration and resolves it instantly in one frame. And then you've got the PD part, which takes multiple frames to resolve whatever's left over. That, where if you had something unexpected, maybe you're holding a heavy object, or maybe you bump into something or whatever, the PD controller still has an important job to do. He takes up all that slack. But the bulk of all the movement, the hand movement, doesn't have to be on the PD controller. It can be on the acceleration correction component, which is awesome. So here's another example. So these are all rotational. This one is positional and rotational, right? So this has got an angular PD on it, and it's got a positional PD on it, and you can see it plays catch up all the time. It does a pretty good job. I mean, it's obviously a little sloppy on purpose. So if I enable the acceleration correction, you end up with this. Whoa, locked. Gorgeous. Love it. Now, what's cool about this? You're like, well, what's the big deal? I've seen that with like kinematic objects or whatever. This isn't a kinematic object. This is still subject to all the physics stuff, right? It gets force from the movement of the target, right? It gets exactly the right amount of force that it needs to get to where it needs to go. And then the deceleration gets rid of anything that it gets exactly what it needs to go, exactly where it needs to go. It's just straight up locked on there. Now, there's still this is a 2 kilogram cube moving like this, by the way. So there is still a considerable amount of force happening to keep this thing on track. And so if I go banging this thing, I mean, it's going to have a significant. So the acceleration ends, the acceleration correction component ends, and then the PD controller has to take over and get this thing back on track after it bounces off the table. But these are not insane forces, which if you thought about, if you were trying to have a PD controller that was locked on this tight, it would have to be generating massive, massive, massive forces to do so. This isn't doing that. It's generating just enough forces. And so if I come over here and start banging on like these weights, certainly I can move these weights around because this is a 2 kilogram cube I'm swinging at this speed. But these aren't exploding. They're not flying off the table in explosions from, like moving a kinematic body would or something like that. So it's just, I'm just super excited about it. Anyway, I can't believe I hadn't done this before. Maybe other people are doing this and I just missed the boat. I don't know. But it's just really, really cool. I've already got it applied to the hands. I've been playing ping pong with it, and it's so obvious when you've got something that requires precision in your movement or your rotation. It's so obvious when you've got that, and it's just locked on. So for my character, I've got all kinds of things that it applies these calculations to because I've got so many rigid bodies in the arm, and any one of them that's dragging behind drags the whole chain down. So I've got these extra calculations in the individual fingers. I've got them in the hands. I've got them in extra wrist rigid bodies that I have for locking and stuff. I've got them in the forearm. I've got them in the upper arm. I've got them in the shoulder. And it's both rotational and positional with regard to all those extra calculations. And what you end up with, like I said, is just with no extra, no overshoot, nothing. It just boom, it goes where it needs to go, and it does it so quick. But if anything gets in the way, PD controller takes over, and you're golden. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. It's fantastic. You guys try it out. Let me know. That's it. That's today's secret sauce. You guys take care. Have a good one. Hope you enjoyed this.